The candles were still lit when my mother decided to end me. It was my 30th birthday, a private room at Bellini's, the whole family around one long table. My mom lifted her wine, smiled the warm smile she saves for an audience, and said, "Time for the truth, everyone. We adopted you for the tax break. You were never really one of us." My sister laughed out loud. My dad stared at his plate and said nothing. And here is the part none of them knew. In my coat pocket, folded in a plain white envelope, I had brought a truth of my own to that dinner. Minutes later, the smiles were gone from every face at that table. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the daughter they called a project, a footnote, an asterisk turns out to be the one who was quietly carrying the whole family on her back. If you've ever poured yourself out for people who never once said your name without a disclaimer, stay with me. This one lands close to home. Drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up to earlier that evening, because the envelope matters. I arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes early, the way I always do, because being early is the only way I've ever felt in control of a room. I'm Myra Smithson. I'm 30 years old and I'm a real estate attorney in Riverton, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days reading the fine print other people skip and finding out who actually owns what. I was wearing my good coat, and in the inside pocket was a plain white envelope I had been carrying for 3 days, working up the nerve. Inside that envelope was a gift. Not a card, not a check, a signed transfer of title. I had decided, after a lot of sleepless nights, that on my 30th birthday I was finally going to tell my parents a secret I had kept for 5 years, and I was going to do it by handing them the deed to their own house, free and clear, as a present. I know how that sounds. I'll explain how a thing like that becomes possible. But I want you to understand the shape of the night I walked into. I came to that dinner hoping that this would be the night I stopped being the guest in my own family and finally became one of them. I had even practiced what I'd say. Something simple. Happy birthday to me, and welcome home. All of us. I touched the envelope through my coat and felt almost brave. Then I hung the coat on the back of my chair, sat down at the head of a table full of people who shared a last name I was given at 5 years old, and waited for the rest of them to arrive. I was 5 when the Smithsons adopted me. I don't remember much of before. I remember the after. A clean bedroom that never quite felt like mine. A family portrait on the stairs where I always stood a half step to the side. They fed me and clothed me and sent me to school. And I am not going to pretend that was nothing. But there's a difference between being raised in a house and being made part of a family, and I learned that difference early. My sister Brooke, 3 years older and theirs by blood, never let me forget I was a project. My mother had a way of introducing me. This is Myra. We adopted her. Never just my daughter. Always the footnote. Always the asterisk. The one person who ever made me feel like I belonged was my grandmother. Grandma Vivian, my dad's mother, a sharp old woman who smelled like peppermints and did not suffer nonsense. She never once said the word adopted. She called me her granddaughter, flat, like a fact of nature, and she meant it. When I was 9 and crying in her kitchen because Brooke had told me I was borrowed, Grandma Vivian took my face in her hands and said, "You listen to me. You are the best thing that ever walked into this family. Don't you ever let them tell you otherwise." She died when I was 22. I think about her every single day. So when you ask why a grown woman would secretly buy her own family's house and never tell them, why I would spend 5 years quietly holding up people who held me at arm's length, the answer starts with a peppermint-smelling kitchen and a woman who told me I belonged before anyone gave me a reason to doubt it. 5 years ago, my parents almost lost everything, and I was the only one who saw it coming. My father, Ron, had sunk most of their savings into a contracting business that went under in a bad winter. On top of that came the medical bills, my mother's knee, then the early warning signs of my father's heart. The house I grew up in, the only home I'd ever had, was sliding toward foreclosure, and they were too proud to tell anyone. I found out the way I find out most things, through records. A property like that doesn't go quietly. There are notices, filings, a pre-foreclosure listing that anyone in my line of work would spot. I was sitting at my desk one Tuesday, and there it was, my childhood address, scheduled for the auction block. I could have called them. I could have said, "Mom, Dad, I know. Let me help." But I knew exactly how that conversation would go. My mother would rather have died on the courthouse steps than take charity from the adopted one. She would have turned it into another story about how Myra thinks she's better than us. Help offered out loud would have been help refused out loud. So I made a different choice. The kind of choice you can only make if you know the law well enough to stay invisible inside it. I decided I would save the house without anyone ever knowing it was me. Not because I wanted credit, because I wanted them to keep their home, and I wanted, somewhere deep down where I didn't like to look, for them to still be okay so that one day they might finally let me in. That was the wound that ran this whole thing. I just didn't have a name for it yet. Here's how a person quietly buys her own family's house, in case you ever need to know. I had set up a small property holding company 2 years earlier, a single-member LLC, the ordinary kind real estate attorneys use to invest on the side. It had a name with no Smithson in it. Just 2 bland words and the letters LLC. When the auction came, my company was the buyer. I put down everything I'd saved and took a mortgage in the company's name, and just like that, the house that was about to be sold out from under my parents belonged to a faceless little business that happened to be me. Then I did the part that still makes my chest tight to remember. I had a property manager, a man I trusted, reach out to my parents on the company's behalf. He told them an investor had purchased the home and wanted to keep good tenants in place. He offered them a lease, $1 a year. I told him to frame it as a tax thing, a write-off, something that wouldn't bruise their pride. My mother, who would not take a dime from her adopted daughter, was delighted to take a near-free house from a stranger who admired their stability. She bragged about it, actually. "We've got the most wonderful landlord, barely charges us a thing. Goes to show, when you live right, things work out." I heard her say that at Thanksgiving, and I had to leave the room. Because I was the wonderful landlord. I was the thing that worked out. And I couldn't say a word, because the second I did, the gift would curdle into a debt, and she'd never forgive me for it. So I smiled, and I poured more gravy, and I kept my secret. A year after I bought the house, my father's heart finally gave its ultimatum. He needed surgery, a real one, the kind with a price tag that empties what little a retired couple has left. Their insurance covered some. It did not cover enough. I heard about it secondhand, through Brooke, who called me mostly to complain about how stressful it all was for her. The hospital needed a chunk of money up front, or the surgery would be delayed, and a delayed heart is a dangerous thing. So I did it again. I called the hospital's billing office, I quoted my father's account, and I paid the balance anonymously, listed only as a private benefactor. The surgery went ahead. My father lived. He's sitting at this birthday dinner, breathing, because of a check he doesn't know I wrote. He never asked who paid. I think a part of him didn't want to know, because knowing would mean owing. And my father has spent his whole life arranging things so he never has to owe the daughter he never quite claimed. Let me say something to you directly, because I suspect a few of you have done a version of what I did. If you have ever poured yourself out for people who would never do the same for you, hoping that this time, this gift, this sacrifice, would finally make them see you, I want you to stay with me to the end of this one. Because there is a difference between love and a toll you keep paying to cross a bridge that was never going to let you in. I didn't understand that yet. I was still paying. I paid for the house. I paid for his heart. And I told myself that someday they would understand what I'd done, and it would matter. The thing that finally pushed me toward that envelope was a sentence I overheard at the restaurant before the cruelty even started. The early arrivals were my parents and my Aunt Lorraine, my mother's sister, and they were already holding court when I came back from the coat check. Aunt Lorraine was praising my parents for weathering the storm, for keeping the house through the hard years when so many people lost theirs. And my mother, glowing, said the line I had heard a dozen times by now. We did it ourselves. Nobody handed us anything. You just have to work hard and live right, and you keep what's yours. Nobody handed us anything. I stood there in my good coat with the deed to that exact house folded over my heart, and I felt the old wound and a brand new thought at the same time. The new thought was this: I was tired. Tired of being the invisible hand that kept this family afloat while they congratulated themselves for swimming. And so I made a decision that I thought, at the time, was the brave and loving one. Tonight, I would tell them. I would hand my parents the deed as a birthday gift to myself, the gift of finally being known, and I would say, gently, it was me, all of it, because we're family, and that's what family does. I genuinely believed that handing them their house, mortgage gone, would be the moment the asterisk fell off my name. I sat down at that table with hope in my coat pocket. I want you to remember that, when you see what they did with it. I came to give them a house. They decided to give me a public execution, and only one of us had brought receipts. The rest of the table filled in around me the way it always did, with me as the still point everyone arranged themselves around without quite including. Brooke arrived with her husband Greg, a man whose entire personality is agreeing with whatever Brooke just said. She kissed the air near my cheek and looked at my coat. Is that new? It looks expensive. Must be nice. Lawyer money. She said lawyer money the way other people say stolen money. A couple of cousins drifted in. An uncle, a family friend named Pat, who'd known my parents forever. 11 of us, maybe 12, in that warm private room with the good tablecloth and the candles my mother insisted on. They sang to me. You'd think that would feel nice. But there's a particular loneliness in being sung happy birthday by people who can't quite look you in the eye while they do it. And I sat there with my hands in my lap and that envelope 2 feet away in my coat, and I smiled and thanked everyone. Brooke spent the first half hour narrating her own life, her kids, her renovation, the cruise she and Greg were planning. Every so often she'd lob something my way. Still single, Myra? You work so much. Though I guess somebody has to. Little cuts, the kind that don't draw blood by themselves, but leave you tender all over by the end of a night. My mother watched it all with the satisfied air of a woman whose real daughter was performing exactly as designed, and I told myself, just hang on. Get through the dinner. Then you'll hand them the deed, and all of this, all these years of small cruelties, will reframe itself into something you can finally forgive. I had no idea my mother was about to hand me a different frame entirely. Somewhere around the main course, my mother started telling the adoption story. She does this at gatherings, when she's had a glass and a half of wine and wants to be seen as generous. It's a performance she's given my whole life, and I could recite it. How they hadn't planned on a third child. How they took me in during a difficult season. How it was the Christian thing to do, the good thing, the hard but rewarding thing. She always tells it like I'm a stray she rescued from the rain, and she always tells it while I'm sitting right there, as if my feelings are a piece of furniture in the story rather than its subject. We did a good thing, taking her in, she said to the table, patting Aunt Lorraine's hand. Not everyone would. People don't realize what it costs to raise a child that isn't really yours. That isn't really yours. The cousins shifted in their seats. Pat, the family friend, gave me a small sympathetic wince. The kind people give you when they feel bad but not bad enough to say anything, and I felt the hope in my coat pocket flicker, because this was not the warm, soft table I had pictured when I rehearsed my speech. This was a table being primed by my own mother to see me as a debt the family had generously absorbed. I remember thinking, very clearly, maybe not tonight. Maybe I fold the deed back up and I try again another year, when she's in a better mood, when the room is kinder. I actually reached toward my coat, then stopped. I told myself to wait, to read the room, to see if it warmed back up. It did not warm back up. It was about to get very, very cold. My sister has never been able to hold a glass of wine and a secret at the same time. While my mother basked, Brooke leaned toward Greg but said it loud enough for half the table, the way she does when she wants to wound while pretending to whisper. "It's just funny," she said. "Miss Big Shot Lawyer," and meanwhile Mom and Dad almost lost the house and she barely lifted a finger. There it was. Almost lost the house. So Brooke knew about the foreclosure, or part of it. I kept my face perfectly still, the face I use across negotiating tables when someone's just shown me a card they didn't mean to. "I helped where I could," I said evenly. Brooke snorted. "Right. Sending a card." She had no idea. None of them did. To Brooke, the story was that the worthless adopted sister had stood by uselessly while our heroic parents pulled themselves out of the fire by their own bootstraps. The idea that the house had been saved by anyone but their own grit had clearly never crossed her mind, because the alternative, that it was me, was unthinkable in the family religion. And in that moment I understood something about Brooke that almost made me feel sorry for her. She needed me to be the failure. Her whole sense of rank in this family depended on there being someone beneath her, and I was the someone. If it ever came out that the broke, useless, borrowed sister was actually the one holding the roof over everyone's heads, Brooke's entire map of the world would have to be redrawn. So she mocked me, loudly, on my birthday, to keep the map intact. I sipped my water and said nothing. The envelope sat in my coat like a stone, and my father, across the table, would not meet my eyes. "I need you to understand exactly what was in that envelope, because it's the hinge the whole night turns on. It was not a weapon. Not when I packed it. It was a quitclaim deed, drawn up properly, signed and notarized, transferring full ownership of the house from my holding company to Ron and Sharon Smithson, my parents, for the sum of $1 and natural love and affection." That's a real phrase we use, natural love and affection, and I had typed it myself and felt my throat tighten when I did. I had also tucked in something else, an old birthday card. Grandma Vivian's last one to me, the one she gave me the year before she died. I had brought it for courage, planning to read her words aloud when I handed over the deed, to explain why I'd done it, why I'd kept this family's home alive in secret. I had built the most generous moment of my life and folded it into a white envelope. As the dinner curdled, I kept my hand near my coat and I argued with myself. Part of me, the part that had spent 25 years learning to read this exact room, was sending up flares. Don't do it. Not tonight. They're sharpening knives. Save the deed. Save Grandma's card. Walk out with your hope intact. But another part of me, the stubborn hoping part, kept saying maybe this is exactly when they need to know. Maybe generosity is the thing that breaks the spell. I have spent my career advising people to protect themselves, to never sign from a place of feeling. And there I sat, ignoring my own counsel, because some lessons you only learn when the people you love most are about to teach them to you in front of an audience. I left the envelope where it was, and I waited. Aunt Lorraine is my mother's echo, 3 years younger and twice as eager to please her. She has a son, my cousin Danny, who has never held a job longer than a season, and I have always suspected that my existence annoys her on a structural level. Here was the adopted niece with the law degree and the good coat, making her own flesh and blood look bad by comparison. So when the table needed someone to twist the knife a little deeper, Aunt Lorraine was happy to volunteer. "You know what they say," she announced, swirling her wine. "Blood is blood. You can love a child you take in, sure, but it's not the same. It can't be. There's a bond you just can't manufacture." She smiled at me when she said it, a sugary little smile, as if she were sharing folk wisdom rather than telling a 30-year-old woman she was counterfeit at her own birthday dinner. A couple of people chuckled, the uncomfortable chuckle of folks who don't agree, but won't object. Greg nodded sagely, because Brooke had nodded first. And my mother looked pleased. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Her sister had just called me a manufactured bond, and my mother looked pleased, like the table was finally putting me in my proper place. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and final. The hope wasn't flickering anymore. It was going out, and in its place was a clarity I hadn't let myself have in 25 years. These were not people who had simply never gotten around to loving me. These were people who had decided a long time ago that I was a line item, a good deed, a tax break even. Though I didn't know yet that my mother was about to use that exact phrase, the clarity was almost peaceful. Almost. Through all of it, my father said nothing, and his silence was its own kind of loud. Ron Smithson is not a cruel man the way my mother is cruel. He's a coward, which I've come to believe is its own species of cruelty, just quieter. All night he'd been studying his plate, his wine, the candle, anything but me. And I started to notice something underneath his avoidance. It wasn't just discomfort. It was fear. Every time the conversation brushed near the house, near money, near the hard years, my father flinched like a man bracing for a door to open that he'd nailed shut. And I realized, with the slow certainty of someone adding a column of figures, that my father knew. Not everything, maybe, but something. He had signed that $1 lease. He had watched a heart surgery get paid for by a benefactor he never named out loud. Somewhere in him, my careful, cowardly father had done the math I'd spent 5 years hiding, and he had chosen, every single day, to say nothing. To let my mother call me a charity case, while he sat on the knowledge that the charity ran the other way. When his eyes finally flicked up and met mine, for just a second, I saw it confirmed. Guilt. Naked and miserable. He looked away first, and that, more than my mother's performance, more than Brooke's sniping, more than Aunt Lorraine's poison, was the thing that straightened my spine. Because I could forgive cruelty born of ignorance. What I could not sit quietly through was a man who knew exactly what I'd done for this family and let me be humiliated for sport rather than risk his wife's bad mood. My father knew. My father stayed silent. And I decided, somewhere between the entree and the cake, that one of us was done being silent tonight. Before the cake came out, I excused myself to the restroom, and I took my coat with me, which probably looked odd, but I needed a minute alone with the envelope. I stood at the sink, and I opened it. The deed was there, crisp and official. My signature and the notary's seal, my parents' names typed in the line for grantee. $1 and natural love and affection. I read those words again and felt how naive they'd been just an hour ago, and tucked behind the deed was Grandma Vivian's card. I opened it, the way I've opened it 100 times since she died, and I read her handwriting, shakier than it used to be that last year, but still hers. Happy birthday to my granddaughter. You were the best thing that ever happened to this family. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. All my love. Always, Grandma. I stood in that restroom, and I let myself feel the whole thing for 1 full minute. The little girl a half step to the side in the portrait. The wonderful landlord nobody knew. The benefactor who saved a heart and got mocked for sending a card. And my grandmother's voice, reaching across 8 years and a sheet of cardstock, telling me what my own mother never would. You belong. You always did. And standing there, I made the decision that turned a gift into a reckoning. I was not going to hand my parents this deed as a present. They had not earned a present. They had spent the evening proving they never intended to. But the truth folded into this envelope was still going on that table tonight. Not as a gift, as a fact. As the one thing in that room that did not care how my mother felt about bloodlines. I slid Grandma's card into my pocket, kept the deed and the rest in the envelope, and I walked back toward the private room with my heart absolutely steady. The cake was waiting. So was my mother's big announcement. When I came back, the cake was on the table, 30 candles burning, and my mother was clearly waiting for me. She had that look she gets when she's decided something is going to happen, and the rest of us are just here to witness it. She let me sit. She let the candles burn down a little. Then she picked up her spoon and tapped it against her wine glass. 3 bright rings that cut through the chatter and pulled every face toward her. Before we do the cake, she said, I want to say a few words. It is, after all, a special birthday. 30 years. She smiled around the table, soaking in the attention, and I felt the room settle into the particular hush families fall into when the matriarch decides to make a speech. Brooke was grinning already, like she knew what was coming. Or maybe just like she knew it would be good for her and bad for me, which to Brooke amounts to the same thing. Aunt Lorraine folded her hands. Greg got out his phone to record, because of course he did. My father set down his fork very carefully, and I watched his shoulders climb up toward his ears. I sat with the envelope in my lap now, under the table, my fingers resting on it. I had walked back in expecting nothing good, and even so, some small animal part of me hoped, one last flare of it, that maybe my mother was about to be kind. Maybe 30 was the number that softened her. Maybe she'd say something true and warm, and I could put the envelope away, and we could start over. I have always been a fool for this family. One last time, I let myself hope. Then my mother smiled wider, lifted her glass toward me, and opened her mouth. Now that Myra's 30, my mother began, I think it's finally time we were all honest with each other. We're family. Families should tell the truth. She said the word family like she owned it. A few people chuckled, expecting a roast, the kind of teasing toast where an embarrassing childhood story gets aired. I could feel the table relax into that expectation. A funny story, a little ribbing. I almost relaxed into it myself. But my mother's eyes, when they landed on me, were not the eyes of a woman about to tell a funny story. They were cool and bright and certain. The eyes of someone who has waited a long time to say a thing out loud and has finally decided the moment is hers. The truth, she went on, is that people have always wondered why we did it. Why we took in a little girl who wasn't ours all those years ago, when money was tight and times were hard. She paused for effect. My father whispered, "Sharon," very low, a warning under his breath, and she rolled right over it without even glancing at him. Brooke leaned forward. Greg's phone was up. Aunt Lorraine wore the expectant smile of a woman about to watch her favorite show. And I sat there, 30 years old, with the deed to my mother's house in my lap, and I understood that whatever came out of her mouth next was going to be the truest thing she'd ever said to me in public, and that it was going to be cruel, because the truth, for my mother, was only ever a way to put me back in my place. I kept my hand flat on the envelope. I kept my face calm, and I waited for her to say it. "We adopted you," my mother said, smiling right at me, lifting her glass like she was toasting, "for the tax break. You were never really one of us." The room went silent. Not a polite silence. The other kind, the kind where a sentence lands so wrong that everyone's body knows it before their manners can catch up. And into that silence, my sister Brooke laughed. Out loud. A real laugh. Delighted. Like our mother had just delivered the punchline she'd been waiting 30 years to hear. Greg's phone kept recording. Aunt Lorraine pressed her napkin to her lips, hiding a smirk. One of the cousins made a small sound, like a wince that escaped. And my father closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't defend me. He just closed his eyes, the way a man does when he can't stop a car crash and decides not to watch. For a tax break. You were never really one of us. I want to tell you it didn't hurt, but I'm not going to lie to you. It hurt the way only the oldest wound can hurt, the one you've spent your whole life carefully not pressing on. 30 years of being the footnote, the project, the borrowed one, distilled into one smiling sentence at a candlelit table, with my sister laughing and my father's eyes shut and my mother's glass still raised. But here is the thing my mother didn't understand about the woman she had spent 30 years underestimating. I don't fall apart when I'm hit. I get very, very calm. It's the thing that makes me good at my job. The worse the news across the table, the steadier my hands get. And as that cruel sentence finished landing, I felt my hands go absolutely still in my lap, resting on a white envelope that had just changed its entire purpose. I did not react the way they expected. I think, on some level, they wanted tears. A scene. The adopted daughter running out of the restaurant crying, proving once and for all that she was too sensitive, too dramatic, not really one of them. That was the script. It's always been the script. Myra overreacts. Myra makes everything about herself. Myra just can't take a joke. So I gave them the opposite. I sat perfectly still and I let the silence stretch, and I watched what the table did with it. Because a cruel thing said out loud is only powerful as long as nobody looks at it directly. The longer I sat there, calm and unbroken, the more the room had to actually sit with what my mother had said. Brooke's laugh died in her throat when no one joined it. Aunt Lorraine's smirk faltered. Pat, the family friend, was staring at my mother now with something like alarm, and one of the cousins had gone pink with secondhand shame. My mother's triumphant smile began, just slightly, to curdle, because the reaction she'd been performing for wasn't arriving. I let it go a few seconds longer. Then I picked up my napkin, dabbed my mouth, set it down, and reached for my coat pocket. No, I reached for the envelope already in my lap, and I stood up. The candles were still burning. 30 of them. I looked around the table, at the people who shared my name, and I felt something I had never once felt at a family gathering in my entire life. I felt powerful. Not angry. Powerful. Because I was the only person in that room who knew what was about to be placed on the tablecloth, and I knew, the way I know the law, that it was going to change everything. I want to be honest about the choice I made standing there, because it would have been easy, and maybe even wise, to do the other thing. I could have walked. I could have picked up my coat, said something quiet and dignified like, "I hope the cake is good," and left that restaurant forever, taking my secret and my deed and my grandmother's card with me. Walking away is a kind of victory. There's a version of this story where I never say a word, where I just stop paying, let the $1 lease lapse, and let my parents discover the truth in the cold language of a notice from a holding company. They'd have figured it out eventually. It would have been quieter. It would have been safer. But I thought about my grandmother's card in my pocket. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And I understood that walking out in silence would be letting them tell me otherwise. One last time, forever. It would mean my mother's sentence got to be the last word. It would mean that the truth of who I'd been to this family, not a tax break, not a charity case, but the hand that held up the roof, would stay buried so my mother's pride could keep its furniture arranged just so. I was done arranging myself around their comfort. I had spent 25 years being small so they could feel large, and 5 years being invisible so they could feel self-made. Not tonight. Tonight the truth was getting a chair at this table whether they liked it or not. So I did not walk. I stood up straighter. I held the envelope where they could see it, and I looked at my mother, who was still holding her glass, and I gave her the only gift she actually deserved. Honesty. "You said you adopted me for the tax break," I said. My voice came out level, almost gentle, which made the table lean in. "I want to start there, Mom, because it's a strange thing to say." I let that sit. There's no such thing as an ongoing tax break for adopting a child. There's a one-time adoption credit. You'd have claimed it the year my adoption was finalized, 25 years ago. Maybe $17,000, the most generous version, and only if your income qualified. One time, a quarter century ago. I watched the words land on the cousins, on Pat, on the people who'd half believed there was some clever financial logic to what she'd said. "So if you took me in for the money," I went on, "you made a terrible investment, because a child costs a great deal more than $17,000 to raise, and you've spent 25 years reminding everyone what a sacrifice it was. The math doesn't work, Mom. It never worked. Which means you didn't really do it for a tax break at all." I paused. "You just like saying it, because it's a way to tell me I was a transaction in front of people, on my birthday." My mother's mouth opened and closed. She had expected tears, and instead she was getting corrected, calmly, on the facts, by the lawyer she'd raised and refused to claim. Brooke said, "Myra, don't—" But I wasn't looking at Brooke. I was looking at my mother, and I was just getting started, and I could feel the whole table realizing that the quiet one had stood up and was not, in fact, going to crumble. I set my hand on the envelope. "But you wanted to talk about truth tonight?" I said. "So let's talk about truth. I brought some too." "Let me ask you something, Mom," I said. "In front of everyone, since we're being honest." I kept my tone mild, the tone I use when I already know the answer and just want it on the record. "Who do you think owns your house?" She blinked. It was such a strange question, sliding in sideways after everything else, that for a second she didn't know what to do with it. "What kind of question is that?" she said. "We do. We own it. We kept that house through the worst years of our lives, no thanks to—" She caught herself, glanced at me, recalibrated. "We kept it. Through hard work." "You kept it through hard work," I repeated. "That's the story, isn't it? That's the one you told Aunt Lorraine an hour ago. Nobody handed you anything." Across the table, my father made a sound. Not a word. A kind of strangled exhale, the sound of a man watching a wave he can't outrun. His face had gone the color of the tablecloth, because Ron Smithson knew exactly where this was going, even if no one else did. "Ron," my mother said, finally noticing him. "What is wrong with you?" He didn't answer her. He was looking at me, and his eyes were begging. Not for me to stop, I don't think, but for some mercy he knew he hadn't earned. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I looked back at my mother, and I picked up the envelope, and I felt the whole room tilt toward me. 12 people. Candlelight. A cruel sentence still hanging in the air, and the deed to my mother's house in my hand, about to become the most expensive truth ever told at a birthday dinner. "You really don't know," I said softly. "After 5 years, you genuinely have no idea." I held the envelope up so the table could see it. This plain white thing that had ridden over my heart all evening. "I brought this tonight as a gift," I said. "I want you all to know that, because it matters. An hour ago, this was going to be the happiest thing I ever did." I turned it slowly in my fingers. I had a whole speech. I was going to hand it to my parents and tell them it came with all my love. I'd even practiced. I could hear how quiet the room had gotten. Even Greg had lowered his phone, sensing this was no longer content. "But my mother wanted the truth at the table tonight," I said. "She wanted everyone to know what I really am to this family. So I'm going to honor that. I'm going to tell the truth too. And then you can all decide for yourselves what I really am." I looked at Brooke, who had gone still, the laughter long gone from her face. I looked at Aunt Lorraine, whose wineglass had stopped halfway to her mouth. I looked at my father, who had put his face in his hands. And I looked at my mother, who was still trying to hold on to the last of her certainty, her chin up, her eyes narrowing, sensing a threat she couldn't yet name. This is the moment the envelope stopped being a gift. I felt it change in my own hand, the way the meaning of a document changes the instant you decide to use it differently. Natural love and affection. It was still in there, but it wasn't a present anymore. It was evidence. And I, who read fine print for a living, was about to read my family the most important fine print of their lives. Brooke tried to stop it. I'll give her that, though I think she was trying to stop the moment more than she was trying to protect me. "Myra," she said, low and urgent, half rising from her seat, "don't. Whatever this is, don't make a scene. It's a birthday dinner. Just sit down and we'll do the cake and forget." "Forget?" I said. I wasn't loud. I was never loud, that whole night. "Forget your mother just told a room full of people I was a tax write-off?" Brooke's face did something complicated then, and for just a second, the armor slipped. "I didn't know she was going to say that," she whispered, and I believed her. "I swear, Myra, I didn't know she'd go that far." And there it was, the one almost human moment of the evening. My sister, who had mocked me my whole life, looking genuinely shaken that our mother had said the cruelest part out loud, in public, with a phone recording. For one breath I saw the girl Brooke might have been if she hadn't built her whole identity on standing one step above me. I felt something for her. I did. But feeling something for someone is not the same as trusting them. And I had learned that lesson in this exact family. Brooke had not known about this particular cruelty. Fine. But Brooke had laughed first. Brooke had spent the night cutting me. Brooke had needed me beneath her for 30 years. Her surprise was real, but her loyalty was not available, and I was done building plans on people whose loyalty wasn't available. "Sit down, Brooke," I said gently. "You're going to want to hear this part too." And she sat. They all did. And I opened the envelope. Before I pulled the papers out, I gave my father one chance to be a man about it. I looked straight at him, at Ron Smithson with his face in his hands at his own daughter's birthday dinner, and I said, quietly, just to him, though the whole table heard it, "You knew, didn't you, Dad?" It wasn't really a question. He lowered his hands. He looked suddenly very old. "Myra," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "Please." "That's not a no," I said. The table's heads turned between us like a slow tennis match. My mother said, "Ron, what is she talking about?" with the first real fear in her voice all night. And my father, cornered at last between his wife and the truth, did the thing he'd been avoiding for 5 years. He told the truth by failing to deny it. "I didn't know how to tell her," he whispered, to my mother, to the table, to the candles. "I didn't know how to tell you. I figured it out a couple years ago. I didn't—" "Tell me what?" my mother demanded. But she was starting to understand. I watched it dawn on her in pieces, the way a foreclosure dawns on people. One notice at a time. The wonderful landlord. The benefactor who paid for Ron's surgery. The $1 lease. The daughter with the law degree and the good coat and lawyer money. Her eyes went from my father to the envelope in my hands, to me. And for the first time in 30 years, my mother looked at me like she had absolutely no idea who I was. "It was me," I said, before she could ask. "All of it. It's always been me." And I laid the deed on the table, face up, in the candlelight, where everyone could read the name. I stood at the head of the table, and I laid the truth out the way I'd lay out an exhibit in court, one document at a time, calm and clear, letting each one settle before I reached for the next. "This," I said, sliding the deed to the center where the candlelight hit it, "is the title to the house my parents live in. The house Mom says they kept through hard work. Look at the owner." Heads bent toward it. I watched Pat read it, watched a cousin's lips move silently around the words. The owner was a holding company, and under it, in the chain of documents I'd brought, my own name. 5 years ago, that house went into foreclosure, I said. My parents were 3 weeks from losing it. I found out the way I find out everything, through the records, and I bought it. Quietly, through my company, at the auction, with my savings and a mortgage in my name. Then I leased it back to them for $1 a year and let them believe a kind stranger had done it, because I knew my mother would never accept help from me. I let that sit. Nobody moved. The candles guttered. "I've paid the property taxes on that house for 5 years," I said, laying down the tax records, neat copies, one for each year. "Here, every receipt." Then the last page. "And this is a hospital statement from 4 years ago. When Dad needed his heart surgery and the money wasn't there, a private benefactor covered it so it could go ahead. That benefactor was me. He's sitting here tonight because of a check I wrote and never signed my name to." I looked at my father. He was weeping silently now, openly. The cowardice finally cracked all the way open. And my mother sat frozen, the wine glass still in her hand, staring at a tablecloth covered in proof. My mother found her voice, and it came out thin and high, nothing like the warm performer from 20 minutes before. You're lying. This is some kind of trick. Ron, tell her to stop." But Ron couldn't tell me to stop, because Ron was nodding, helplessly, confirming every word with the small broken motions of his head, and the table could see it. They could see the deed and the tax records and the hospital statement spread across the cake plates, and they could see my father nodding, and they could see my mother coming apart, and the math was no longer deniable. I looked at my mother, and I said the words I'd put in that teaser, the words this whole night had been bending toward. You wanted to tell the truth at this table tonight, Mom, I said. Funny. I brought the truth too. I let the room hold it. You told everyone I was adopted for a tax break that doesn't exist, that I was never really one of you, and meanwhile, for 5 years, I have been the reason you have a roof over your head and a heartbeat in Dad's chest. I gestured at the documents, not with anger, just with an open hand, the way you present a closing argument. So here's the truth, since we're all being honest. I'm not the charity case at this table. I'm the one who's been quietly carrying it. Aunt Lorraine had gone gray. Brooke had both hands over her mouth. Greg's phone was face down on the table now, forgotten. And the cousins, the uncle, the family friend Pat, they were all looking at my parents now, not at me. And the looks on their faces were the looks of people recalculating 25 years of a story they'd been told. The bond you can't manufacture, Aunt Lorraine had said. I'd manufactured a saved house and a saved life. I'd just done it without asking for credit. Until now. My mother made one last grab at the old power. She set down her glass, drew herself up, and went for the weapon that had always worked before, making me the problem. You've been spying on us, she said. Sneaking around, buying up our home behind our backs, playing some game so you could humiliate us. This is sick, Myra. This is exactly the kind of... Stop. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it. One word. Flat. And it cut through hers because the whole table was already with me. She stopped. And I said the thing I'd carried up from somewhere very deep. The thing that was the real center of the whole night. You said I was never one of us. I looked right at her. You've been living under my roof for 5 years? The sentence dropped into the room like a stone into a well, and I watched it hit bottom in her eyes. Every night you've slept in that house, I said. Still quiet, still steady. You've slept in a home I saved. Every time you told someone you kept it through hard work, you were standing in a gift you didn't know I gave. You called me a transaction mom. But I'm the only person at this table who ever loved this family with no expectation of getting anything back. I bought that house and said nothing. I paid for Dad's heart and said nothing. I came here tonight to hand you the deed, free and clear, as a present, because I still, God help me, wanted to belong to you. My voice didn't break. I made sure of that. And you used my birthday to tell me I was a tax write-off. The candles had burned down low. Nobody at that table was laughing now. So no, I said. You won't be getting the house as a gift. Not after tonight. The truth came to dinner, just like you wanted. I hope it was worth the wine. And my mother, who had never once in 30 years been at a loss in front of an audience, opened her mouth and found there was nothing left in it. Then the room exploded, the way these rooms always do once the calm one has finished. My mother came back to life all at once, shoving back her chair, her face blotching red. How dare you? After everything we gave you, the home, the food, the schooling, you do this. You ambush us. You turn my own family against me at a dinner table. She was shrieking now, pointing, the warm matriarch gone entirely. That house is ours. You can't just... Ron, say something. Tell her. Aunt Lorraine jumped in, shrill. This is disgraceful, airing all this in public. As if the public airing hadn't started with her own sister calling me counterfeit 20 minutes earlier. And here is what I want you to notice, because it's the whole reason it worked. I didn't shout back. I stood there, perfectly still, my hands quiet at my sides, and I let them be as loud and ugly as they wanted to be. Because the documents were on the table, and the documents didn't need a raised voice. The louder my mother got, the worse she looked, screaming about a house in front of the very proof that it was mine. Greg had quietly pulled Brooke's chair back from the table, distancing them both. Pat, the family friend, stood up, set his napkin down, and said to my mother, in a voice full of quiet disgust, "Sharon, that girl saved your life. Both your lives. And you said that to her tonight?" He looked at me. "I'm sorry, Myra. I should have spoken up an hour ago." And one by one, that's what the table did. They turned. not toward the screaming woman defending a house that wasn't hers, but toward the calm one who'd been carrying them all along. My father finally spoke, his voice wet and ruined, saying my name, saying, "I'm sorry," over and over to a tablecloth covered in everything he'd stayed silent about. The performance my mother had run for 30 years was over. The audience had finally seen who was actually holding the family up. I did not burn their lives down. I want to be clear about that, because revenge stories sometimes end with someone tossed in the street, and that was never who I wanted to be. The morning after, I had my lawyer, a colleague, since I wasn't going to represent my own family, send my parents a formal, fair letter. They could remain in the house, but on an honest market lease, with a reasonable timeline to either sign it or make other arrangements. No more $1 fiction, no more invisible benefactor. Just the truth, in writing, the way everything should have been from the start. I kept the deed. The gift was off the table for good. My father called me a week later, and for the first time in my life he said the words out loud. That he knew what I'd done, that he'd known for 2 years, that his silence was the worst thing he'd ever done, and he'd carry it to his grave. I let him say it. I didn't rush to comfort him. Some apologies you have to let a person feel all the way through. Brooke texted, then called. She apologized for the laugh, for the years of it, and to her credit, she didn't ask me for anything. We talk now, carefully, like two people learning a new language. My mother has not apologized. I don't expect she ever will. It's not in her vocabulary. Aunt Lorraine tells anyone who'll listen that I tore the family apart, though fewer people listen now. And the recording Greg made? Somehow it circulated through the extended family. Everyone heard my mother say it. Everyone heard what I'd done. The story she'd controlled for 30 years got rewritten in a single night, and this time, it got told true. I went back to my apartment in Riverton, to my own quiet life, and I framed Grandma Vivian's card and hung it where I'd see it every morning. My door is open now to the people who treat me like a person. To my father, slowly, if he keeps doing the work. To Brooke, carefully. It is closed to anyone who needs me to earn a seat I should have been given for free. I stopped paying the toll on that bridge. I still don't know if my mother ever loved me. But I finally know it was never my job to prove I was worth loving. Family isn't the blood you're born with. It's the people who'd never make you prove you belong. So that's how a birthday dinner taught my family who really owned the table. The envelope. The deed with my name on it. Grandma's card that knew the truth before any of them. If there's someone in your life who keeps making you earn a seat you already paid for, do me a favor. Check whose name is really on the table. You might be carrying more than they'll ever admit. If this one reached you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for the next one.